This podcast discusses themes of mental health, which some people may find emotive, such as suicide or other adult-themed content. The information contained in this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. All views expressed are solely those of individuals involved and do not represent the opinions of any entity whatsoever with which we have been, are now, or will be affiliated. The information is not meant to diagnose or treat any mental health condition. If you're experiencing mental health symptoms, we encourage you to contact a mental health service within your community. If you're experiencing a mental health emergency, please seek the relevant support and interventions by presenting to your local accident and emergency department or contacting the relevant emergency services.
You're listening to the Men's Mental Health Podcast, The Man Hug.
Welcome to The Man Hug, the monthly men's mental health podcast. I'm Dean McShane.
I'm Dan Cooper.
I'm Ian Pearce-Hayes.
And I'm Conleth Kelly.
Each month we will discuss a different topic related to men's mental health, which will include a guest speaker who will discuss their own personal story. And each month we will also be showcasing an organisation or charity within the Merseyside area who work within mental health to help build your signposting skills. Hello, welcome to this month's Man Hug. We have two more fantastic guests, and today's theme is all about resilience. So later on, we'll be chatting to Helen Gilbert from the Samaritans. She is the branch director for Liverpool and Merseyside Samaritans, and she will be telling us all about this amazing service that has ran for over 70 years. Our first guest is actor Christopher Lee Power, who is a seasoned performer with an extensive background in the arts, both theatre and film, and also established the Power Foundation to provide young people with access to the arts. Christopher, welcome to the Man Hug.
Oh, it's great. It's lovely to see you all.
Yeah, lovely to have
And
you.
it was raining this morning, but look, the sun is out.
It is.
I like that. I said to my wife, I may need the umbrella.
Yeah.
But no, we didn't need.
The sun's shining for us, it's great. And before we get on to all of the gossip of Coronation
Yeah.
Street and Hollyoaks, we want to know about yourself, really.
Yeah.
So if you want to tell us a little bit about your own story.
Yeah, not a problem. I grew up. People often say to me, "Where are you from?" Because they hear my voice, and they assume that you've been to Eton or Harrow and you grow up in London. But actually, I grew up in Rock Ferry. Yeah. My family are from Liverpool, West Derby, by the Olympia, I think it's called. Yeah. And I remember my grandma telling us that she grew up in Dublin and then she moved here and had my dad and his brother. So I have family in Liverpool. But Rock Ferry was a song by Duffy, if I remember rightly. Yeah. And it's a small area of Birkenhead, and Birkenhead's quite well known for Birkenhead Park. And we know that in New York, Central Park was modelled on Birkenhead Park. But life for me, I would say, began in the early 70s. So I was born in 1968, and my dad had a tough time. I mean, he was in and out of prison for about 18 years for petty things, like Borstal and approved schools, which were around many years ago. And we lived in a 2-bedroom flat on top of a taxi place, working class, and we had no toilet inside the house, it was outside. We had no bathroom, we had a Belfast sink. And 4 of us lived in 1 bedroom, slept, and my mum and dad in another. And it was a difficult time. It was the 70s. A lot of unemployment, but my family, my mum and dad survived wonderfully. They were both entertainers, but also had jobs, painter and decorator. And my mother was a cleaner. However, in 1974, when we were children, a couple arrived at the house, the hallway, and a fight broke out. They pulled out a knife, killed my dad's friend, murdered him, and my dad was stabbed terribly. When the forensic teams had gone, there was blood stains everywhere. They were caught and justice was done. And I know even now where they lived, the couple, And forgiveness is a very interesting thing. And I'll mention something a little later, remind me, which is to do with this eye and the scar. But it impacted my dad. My mother started having anxiety attacks and was on, I need to get this pronunciation right, and you'll know better than me, Valium, is that right? Was used a lot in the 70s. But for whatever reason, the doctors had diagnosed me as the years went on with hyperactivity, lack of coordination, and speech problems. Now, you know a lot more than I do, but when we look at ADHD, which is similar to hyperactivity or on the spectrum, the doctors didn't really know much about that. They've done a lot of research. And they decided to put me, I think it was 1978, in a hospital. I won't mention the name. It was a children's hospital. It was built in 1921. And I'm going to be careful how I word this, because what I'm about to tell you actually happened to a lot of children. I was there being given whatever medication. It was a very tough time because we went there from Sunday evening till Friday and came home. But they had decided to put me in a special jacket called a restraint jacket because having hyperactivity, I was lashing out. The dormitories were split into two, so you had a boys and girls in a little corridor. It was a horrible time for me because I was young. And I used to watch my mother come down the hill on a Thursday to bring me my colouring books. And I tried to escape once. And I say that, and I really mean that. I was very young, and I ran away, got my food and a little handkerchief. And I got to the top of the hill, and a lady brought me into the house and said, "Oh, where are you going?" I said, "I need to get back to Birkenhead," which wasn't far. But for a child, it was. But, you know, if you're in the car today, it is quite simple. And she phoned up the matron, as they were called. And the matron came and picked me up and took me back and said, "Right, you're not going home this weekend." I did go home. So it was a horrible time. My mum and dad didn't like it. So my dad arrived in a Ford Escort or something with a Stanley knife. He came out, walked in, cut me free. Rightly so, the police were called and the social services. And I respect that. They had to be called. And my social worker or their social worker. And something happened. There was a lot of talks, but we won the battle. And I wasn't, I didn't go back. One of the things I have to mention about that was I remember pulling all the tables together, grabbing the old-fashioned screens that went around, a bit what you see on the Carry On films. And we put it around so it looked like a theatre. And we would perform on that when we were young, improvisation. And at that moment in time, I said to myself, there is something about performing that I enjoy. And anyway, we went back home and I went off to school. My education was terrible. I couldn't spell. There was still that hyperactivity issue. And so at times I got frustrated at school and teachers didn't understand me. And when someone put in front of me a piece of paper with, as you did in those days, we're going to do a spelling test or a maths test, I would get very frustrated and I would be fearful. And so there were times where I looked at teachers as enemies and I didn't like to be touched. There's a reason for that. And that's because sadly for me, at the age of 8, 9, 10, 11, I was horrifically sexually abused. I'm being very open about this. I don't generally talk about this because it's to do with mental health and other problems. I'm going to be open and honest with you. And I was, use your imagination, but it was men and women that did horrible things to me. And I suppressed that for a long time. And you can imagine the anxiety and stress that caused in later life, because as children, psychologically, we are like sponges. And I've done a lot of psychology learning, and we do pick up on things. And if you create a bad environment for children, most likely they will grow up replicating that environment. I didn't tell my mum and dad. but it was something that stuck with me for a long time. It was a terrible time because looking back, I always said to myself, at the age of 8 and 9, what if I was murdered at that time? What if they did something terrible to me and I never got to see my mum and dad again? So I did suppress that. So at school, I was kind of very fearful of being touched. The other reason for that, I'll finish after this and then you can ask more questions, was that when I was in Liverpool in the late 70s, staying at my uncle's house, I went back the next morning on the ferry boat to find that my house door was smashed. My mother was in the house. My dad was nowhere to be seen. My cousin came out and put her arms around me and said, "We need to tell you something. Your dad had a bit too much to drink and someone had phoned the police." And my dad, who I love, he was very strict, I love, had got to the door when the police arrived and he was drunk and he put a plastic shotgun through the letterbox. And I understand that the police have a duty of care to the community, but they broke down the door. Anyway, the newspapers got involved. My dad was charged with assault on 13 police officers. But he was, when they went to the hospital to see him, he was black and blue, and I'm just going to leave it there. And that really had an impact upon me. So when I got to school, anyone in authority, like a teacher, was a bad memory for me. And I remember going up to a teacher, and I said to them, and it was a joke, and I'm not going to say it on air, but I joked about Lemsip. And there's a joke related to Lemsip, and it's about coughs, when you have a cough. And it was just a joke. I was very young, and he punched me. And so I was very small, and I retaliated, and I hit him back. But he dragged me into the corridor, and then other teachers came and got hold of me. So I had 3 teachers restraining me. So as a young teenager, I got frustrated, and I lashed out. I do understand, and I don't condone what I did. And I understand, as a drama teacher myself in the past, there are certain things you are allowed to do when it comes to young people. So I'm not saying that young teachers should sit back and allow children or young people to abuse them verbally, because you have to protect yourself. But in the 70s, when that happens to you, I had nowhere to go except to fight back. So yeah, schooling was terrible. Yeah. It was awful. The greatest thing for me at school was that at playtime, I would sneak off to the hall. And Jean-Pierre, who was a friend of mine and a great pianist, he would be playing the piano. And I'd jump up on the stage and I'd start to sing and dance and improvise. And I felt, this is definitely what I want to do. All or most of the subjects I didn't like. I was terrible. But acting and performing was where I felt at home. And so when I left school, my mum and dad were entertainers, and they would go around the pubs and clubs. Sometimes they had a drama and a keyboard, and they'd sing songs, Patsy Cline and Billy Joe Spears, and I would sing. But in the early 80s, culturally, a lot of things were going on in our culture. Now, I may be a lot older than you 3. I'm just assuming I am. Am I not? No, I'm 56 now. But you all look young anyway.
I'll take
that. Excellent. So in the early 80s, we'd made that transition from the 70s to the 80s with music, fashion, and technology. And I was fascinated about the 80s. But culturally, things were going on. And I was still suppressing my anger and frustration and feelings. And I think because my dad was a manager of a pub and we had a bar, I found that one way of tackling my issues and problems with life, finding my identity, and certainly with the abuse, was I would turn to alcohol. And remember, I'm a very young person. It must have been, I may have been 12, maybe earlier than that. So gradually, and this is how addictions happen, have a drink, go to the park with your friends, have some merry down cider, have a bit of whiskey, have a bit of gin, have a bit of brandy for school. That's what I used to do for a cold. I don't know anything about medical things. I just heard someone say brandy's okay for a cold, and I don't know whether that's true. But I decided to test it out one day, and I had a drink and another drink and another drink. By the time I got to school, I was all over the place, swinging on the curtains. So I'm not going to recommend that. Did it work? No, not for me anyway. But I'm not a medical professional. So I left school without any qualifications. And I became addicted to alcohol. And then culturally around that time, people were gambling in the arcades. And then that became a vicious circle. We were looking for things to do. Funding was very low in those days. We had youth clubs, and that was good. And we'd go to the youth club. But what do you do on the days that the youth club wasn't open? What do you do on a Saturday and a Sunday? Remember, employment was very low. We'd just come out of that miners' strike in the late 70s, 80s. We'd had the riots in all the other areas. So going to the arcade was kind of the thing we did. But the problem with that is that you have to find the money. So when I first, after drama school, the only thing I could really do, I must say that I did go on a YTS, which was £26.50. And I'd gone to the same school, like a drama place that Kathy Tyson and David Morrissey had been to previously. And they taught me a lot about crafts and acting. And it was only £26. But I used to use my wages in the pub, drinking, and on the arcade machines. It took over my life. It got to the point where I wasn't paying my mum and dad my keep. It took over, and the drinking just made me look horrible. I was very anemic. I was very skinny. And so it was a vicious circle, and people noticed. Changes your personality. So that was the point. Where was I? It was at 1980s. So I got to that point where I was in a terrible state. I was self-harming. Now, I'm going to show you, so you know. So I have a lot of scars on my arm. I'm ashamed of that, and I cover it up sometimes, because self-harming was not right for me. It was a way of getting attention. And certainly on top of that, with the alcohol, it just added to the pressure and to me wanting more attention. And that's what my problem was. I was looking for love from my family, from my friends. I was wanting people to accept me, the teacher, the youth worker. And when you didn't get that, and you remember in those days, we didn't have things where you could just, you couldn't just call into a radio or a podcast or a place where you could talk to people. You had to kind of deal with that. Yeah. So I'm going to stop there so you can ask more questions. But that leads up. It was a long opening answer, but that just leads right up to the point of my dark days.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing it, because, just listening to the significant amount of trauma that you went through, it's when you hear things like this, and especially abuse, people can go down a very dark path. But it sounds like you realise now that you were self-medicating with alcohol, and you were using self-harm as a maybe a distraction and other methods, really. So thank you so much for sharing it, because it's so brave and honest of you to do that. From going from that to finding a profession that you love in acting, how did you mentioned how when you were younger you realised that you got this bug and maybe you were able to step into another world, really, and is that what you found with
Yeah, absolutely. So leaving school without any qualifications, culturally being involved in all those things, what happened to me, two things happened. I found that going to a local church at the time helped me tremendously, because we all have our ways of coping. And the reason why I did that was because in what I didn't mention, which I will mention, is in 1979, culturally again, there were a lot of people who were turning to solvents, sniffing glue. And it was going on. And I got involved in that because I wanted a sub-family. I wanted to feel loved. And I just felt that this group over there in that old derelict building who was sniffing glue accepted me at the time. And so by joining that group and sniffing glue with them, I felt part of that sub-family, and I felt this is my home. And sadly, that took over my life with the alcohol and the glue. And my dad found out, and I was in such a state that my mother had to bath me as a teenager. And my dad walked in with a razor blade and some paint, and he painted on my wall, "Drugs kill," in red paint, and left the razor blade there and said, "If you don't give up, then something's going to happen to you." And so when I got to 18 or 19, I was rushed to hospital because I had a drug overdose, which really upset me. And it was so bad, I couldn't take any more. And remember, we are talking about, the 70s and 80s. And I remember the doctor talking to me about finding something positive to do with my life. And I did. And I said, I'm going back into education. And I remember sitting on a coach, and this man came up to me going to college to do a bit of drama. And he said, "Hello, Ron Gittings here." And everyone knows Ron Gittings because he's all over the press and the media. He's quite very famous now. He's dead because he's left behind a wonderful flat in Oxton with a great, a great treasure. Is it trove? And he became my mentor, and for 33 years. And I remember going to his flat, and he just started on the fireplaces, and he was painting all these great things. And he started working with me, and we went to the same college. And so the first thing he did with me was work on my voice. And we'd go off to the park, and he'd say, "Right, I want you to read out loud, Christopher, to everyone." Just walking past, well, I can't do that. But I did. And then we'd watch all the great films with Sir Laurence Olivier and Sir John Gielgud and Richard Burton and Brian Blessed. And then we'd go to London, and we'd go to the art galleries in Manchester and Wirral. And as the years went on, I started to change my voice. I learned life skills. He taught me how to spell. And he'd introduce me to people from all different walks of life, like the solicitor. And he'd make me stand there talking to a solicitor to make sure that I was able to communicate. And I'd meet all these people from different levels. You've got working class, middle class, upper class. And I then decided I want to go to drama school. Every drama school said no at that moment in time. One drama school in Manchester said, "Don't even bother being an actor." And it destroyed my life. But I never gave up. And with the help of the church, the mentoring, I finally got into Richmond Drama School, and I also went to RADA. It was a great opportunity to learn about the acting profession. And I graduated with an Oxford Diploma. And then my life started to change. I went into the soaps as a young actor, only doing very, very small parts. I didn't do the main part, but I did small roles, CID, the parent, the patient. And that gave me good grounding to understand the whole profession, being in front of the camera, how it all works, meeting with the other actors and the director. But as the years went on, I started getting the more prominent roles. And that turnaround for me happened in 2012 when someone offered me a brilliant role of Colin Jarvis, head of social services, in an award-winning film called For Love's Sake, which ended up on Amazon Prime. And then my life started to change as an actor. It's then I started getting those wonderful roles in Shakespeare and doing lovely television dramas and lots of theatre, from Chekhov to Brecht to Shakespeare. And I've enjoyed that journey. It's been tough. It's been very difficult. But sadly, 10 years ago, my dad was rushed to hospital because he was a smoker. And I was called in to see him with all my family, and it broke my heart. And you have to understand what I'm about to tell you. Because I saw my dad dying and they were giving him morphine, I was very angry, and I did explode in the hospital. And I know the nurses didn't like it, and I have apologized at the time, because I was so frustrated seeing my dad die that I ran and I screamed and I started hitting the bin with my fist. And so it was a difficult time. But I did send a letter in to apologize for my actions, because I don't condone what I did. I was just so sad that my dad died. And it didn't help that my sister got cancer, and I was watching her, and I tried my best to go elsewhere to look at alternative medicine to help her. And I know that people do survive cancer, and I know people do come through it because I've got friends, female and male, and it does happen. And whether that's a religious experience or whether that's medication through the doctors, it's still lovely to see people come through that. But sadly, my sister died, and holding her hand and watching her was very difficult. So I started having more panic attacks. And that's when I turned to No Panic, the organisation. And they helped me tremendously with my mental health, because I was working recently with the BAFTA director playing the general in a big play. And it was just lovely to call upon No Panic to help me through this time. And I learned a lot about anxiety and a lot about exercises with the breathing and the muscles and going to the gym. So I hope that brings you up to date. And I do apologise for prolonging my answers.
No, it's brilliant. Thank you so much. It was lovely to hear Ron Gittins being mentioned, because we did a whole podcast with Martin Wallace, the filmmaker.
Yeah, I know Martin, yes.
And Martin came on and he told us all about the documentary he's making about Ron.
Yeah,
So it's lovely to hear how inspirational he was and important he was in your life as well. I just wanted to touch on something that you mentioned there, which, No Panic, the charity, really. But one of the things which I think we'd find really useful is what is it that you do during stressful periods? So maybe performances or when you've got lots of lines to learn. What types of things do you do to manage your stress?
I'm a huge believer in hobbies as well. So apart from, I have a lot of exercises I do, which I learned through No Panic, and also how to think positively. My wife has been a great rock in my life for 21 years, and she understands all this, and she's studied so much about anxiety herself, and so she's able to calm me down. But it all starts up here. It's the thought process, and if we could learn how to change that, then that would be wonderful for us, because we'd be on the road to recovery a lot faster. But I think when you have phobias and anxieties, your imagination is very powerful. From an acting point of view, and the techniques I teach my actors because I'm a director as well. When I look at the Meisner technique, who is a wonderful teacher, he talks about the imagination. And as an actor, if we can recreate a sense of truth on the stage by using our imagination, then our emotions are tangible. And that really applies to the audience. The audience feel that. As we're sitting here today, our emotions are tangible. It's like an energy. We give that off. And if we can recreate that would be great on the stage. So the imagination, if it's powerful enough, so if I think about a moment in my time, a moment in my past, where I lost a relative or my dad, and that creates tears. No one sees that, but the imagination works for that. Then the audience applaud. The same with anxiety. If we think a horrible thought and our imaginations run wild, it affects our breathing. Our muscles become tense. We start to get the adrenaline, which is like, to my knowledge, I may be wrong, but I've learned that it's like a kind of, it's like a liquid, and there's a taste to it, and that rushes around, creating all these horrible sensations we get with the palpitations. If we can calm ourselves down with the breathing. I used to breathe differently, but I learned to breathe through the nose on 4 and out through the nose. And it really relaxes you. So the answer to your question is I do a lot of that before I go onto the stage. But the other thing is I'm a huge, huge fan of the 1980s. So I love listening to 80s music, watching 80s documentaries, and I love narrating. I do a lot of narrating for people, both on radio and for people who come to me as a freelancer. And one day my dream is to narrate a documentary about the 1980s. So having that hobby is great.
Yeah.
So that's how I mean, going around the park or going to historical buildings is really a great start for people with mental health. Hobbies, to my knowledge, the creative arts is a great tool for people with mental health. It changes your focus. And part of anxiety and the panic attack is that if we can switch off that thought and focus on something else, you're not giving room to that thought. It has no power over you unless we allow it power. And remember, I'm not a politician. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a medical practitioner. But I learn these things as you get older.
I think it's brilliant advice, and for someone who's had so many sort of traumatic incidents, and to now be using techniques like this, I think it's fantastic. It's really good advice. What is it that you would say about when you're actually performing? What is it that within that helps with your own well-being and mental health?
It's where I belong. It's it's a passion. Money helps. It always does, certainly when you've got bills to pay. But there is something deep inside me that is very passionate about the arts and also encouraging young people. When you're acting, you're taking on another role, there is a journey you go on. And what a privilege it is for us actors to play someone else. And we are like teachers as actors. We have something to say to society. And that could be political. It could be about the medical profession. It could be about the environment. Music, songs, colour, anything to do with film, theatre, or the arts or crafts. It is powerful. Our emotions are moved by music. We are in a great position as artists to help people in the public eye, people in the public in the theatre to be moved, to be challenged. How wonderful it is to go into a theatre and be lost for 1.5 hours or 2 hours or 5 hours if it's Hamlet, to be lost and just be moved and challenged and to come away feeling uplifted. Or you watched a play on drugs or alcohol or someone, with cancer, and then it allows you to come away and do something positive with your own life. When that happens, our job is worthwhile. Yeah. Honestly, people don't realise that films and dramas and theatre are so powerful and moving. They can really change your lives. Can I tell you a very short story? And it's very powerful. There was a man who was working in a bank in the basement, clearing all the old files. And he'd watched Schindler's List. And he was affected by that, as we all were. And as he was working in the basement, he came across some old files related to some Jewish community about land. And he, rather than get rid of them, he thought about the film and how he was moved and how Schindler rescued the Jews, some of the Jews. And that prompted him to go on a journey and help that Jewish community find the land. But these papers, these documents were going to be lost. That's the power of the moving image. That's the power of radio when you're in the car. That's the power of art and architecture and reading books. It can change your lives.
Yeah, definitely. We've had quite a lot of guests on who have been performers and singers, and they've said exactly the same thing. It's so true about how it can impact on your emotions and and change you like that as well. It's wonderful to hear how you benefit from it yourself as well. Being a performer and what it does for you as well. One of the things I was going to ask you was about what you think within your life has made you more resilient, but I think everything you've spoke about is literally added to, to how you are now. Would you agree?
Do you know, I do. And I think it's important in our culture, celebrity culture, reality culture, is to understand this. When you're in the public eye, a lot of people, celebrities, actors like myself, we sometimes have a past. And I think it's important to understand that, because people are looking for role models. And I think it's sad that in my own journey, on my journey, that some people have been discriminating and horrible about my past. And I've been through that stage where people have just laughed at me, mocked me. I had a television director walk up to me in front of me and my wife and say to me these words: "If you ever walk into my office with your voice, the voice you have now, I will send you away." That's crippling. I've had people turn around to me and say lots of horrible things because I'm friends with people from different nationalities. And they've screamed at me on the street, "You are this, you are that lover, you are that lover." I've had people talk to me about my past because I drank a little, because I self-harmed, because I sniffed glue. As a teenager, they discriminate me. They won't accept me into their little cultural circle. And what they don't realise, everything I've told you, all three of you, happened in the late 70s and the early 80s. By the time I got to 1985, I'd given up that lifestyle to move forward as an actor. I don't appreciate or like it when people hold on to the past. They don't realise the struggles and the journey you've been on to get to where you are today. Yeah. And I'm glad that there are people out there, directors, producers, who so what, Christopher, you've got this past. That shouldn't affect my work. In fact, people out there should be, saying things like, sorry, I'm not, I hate egotism, but well done for that journey. You've inspired me. Is there anything you could say to me that inspires me? Yeah. And I'm being open and honest. I'm sorry. In our society, there are people out there that just are not just egotistic, but they're selfish and they discriminate and they just don't care. They're greedy and they'll say horrible things about your past. They don't realise the journey you've been on. And I tell you now, I have been discriminated terribly. You drank. You sniffed glue, you self-harmed, you gambled. It's just wrong.
Yeah, it is.
I'm sorry, it's wrong.
Yeah, and I think if people don't have an understanding of, why things like that happen in your life, not that they need to or should, but I mean, it's quite clear to us, having such a significant traumatic events happening in your life, then obviously you were using these methods for your own sort of self-medication, really, at the time, What sort of things have you got planned for the future?
In the future, I've got some filming to do on a film that I can't say, but I'm moving on to do a musical which is called Under the Mersey Moon. I play Kenny, and it's a fantastic cast. Billy Butler and his wife Leslie are in that as well. That's at the Flora Pavilion. Oh, brilliant. And I'm just rehearsing at the moment, going over my lines. I'm then going to do On the Banks of the Royal Blue Mersey again, which we did a few months ago, which got standing ovations. And I must be honest with you, and people will think, oh, that's interesting. I don't know much about football. Yeah. Okay. I don't support any football team. I didn't like football growing up because of, I just didn't like sports. I keep fit. I'll go to the gym. I have a famous footballer in the family who has played for the big teams. That's as far as it goes. But when I was offered the role of narrating the history of Everton Football Club to where they're going to Bramley Moor, it was a great opportunity just to bring some humour to the narrator. And it's a fantastic play with a great cast, wonderful writers and director, and it's coming on again. And I've got other things in the pipeline. My film, not my film. Yeah, I can say my film. My story is now becoming a feature film, and we have a lot of people involved. So we have the screenplay. We haven't got the title yet, and we have at the moment a BAFTA director connected. I'm not going to mention any names. And so where we are up to now, we're just talking to distribution companies and looking at funding. You know how difficult funding is. But basically what I've shared with you tonight, not tonight, it's daytime. Basically, it feels like nighttime. Basically what I've shared with you will kind of be the outline for the film.
Wow.
We don't know when. But it will happen soon.
Well, if you need free good-looking extras,
I'm
sure Ian would make a great extra over there. Fantastic. Well, that's excellent, and all these things we will look out for. We'd love to come and see you perform. Our sort of like final question: what sort of advice would you have for anyone who wants to get into the arts?
My advice is this: I always say to young people, and it's very important, parents, if you're listening, or guardians, be very careful how you approach young people when they want to get involved in the arts. Never kill a dream. Yes, by all means, encourage them to have another job like I do, but don't kill a dream. Support them. Let them go on that journey. Find out all the information they can about drama schools or dance schools or the entertainment industry. And young people, if you're listening, go for it. Do your research. Get involved in drama groups, or if you're a singer, in choirs or singing groups, or if you're a dancer or the arts, get involved in your area. Find a mentor. Find some great teachers who will nurture you and take you on that journey. But please, please don't give up. And lastly, avoid egotism. Avoid being a diva. There's a difference between being the best you can be and being, I'd like this, and could we put the air conditioning on, and can I have a drink of water? That's okay. But just avoid the egotistic way of life. It really is not good. And always try and be kind. Don't be a doormat. Be kind, because you never know. The next person you talk to or you're interviewed by could be the next director of your film or producer of your song or employer.
Brilliant advice. Thank you so much. Any of the
Oh yes, I've been sitting and looking at these two. I've been waiting for your questions. I'm missing your voices.
It's just two things. It's funny because one of the things you did say, and the three of us just looked at each other and
Can I have a drink now?
Yeah.
Yes.
The three of us just looked at each other and just nodded. Was how many fellas have actually come on to the show and goes, and if it wasn't for my wife, the amount of support, things like this, whatever, and that is absolutely gorgeous. But one person, whenever you're actually talking around this, was I actually probably would have liked to have met, would have been your dad. The reason being, because I know around that period, around that time, I've worked in areas in Birkenhead North, and one area in particular, which we brought up on the first episode, wasn't it, with Mel Bowen, with the Spider Project, was about the Fort Estate, Beechwood Estate, around there.
Areas,
I was around the heroin problem around that time, and it's just, it was really, really bad. It was right across the world, don't get me wrong, whatever, but it was a bunch of parents who got together and go, we've had enough of this, and they set up PADA, Parents Against Drug Abuse. And I keep saying I could show you the room where it was actually set up. So it is also for the love of good people that actually does help us during these periods as well. Yeah, you can have negative role models, things like that, but we've got to celebrate all those positivity, as you are still doing today with your foundation as well.
Yeah,
so
yes.
I just want to thank you for that, for actually helping these young people.
Yeah,
brilliant. Ian?
Yeah, just one point. There was absolutely lots, and it was just, again, well done for sharing your story and talking so openly and honest. And it's such a difficult thing, and it's for us, it's a privilege to be part of that. Just one small thing, but a big thing in a sense. You talked about, I think you called it, I'm not sure, about the bugger performing or the buzzer performing.
Yeah.
And I'm always quoting bits from The Guardian, but this is yesterday's Guardian, and it says it's official, the arts are good for your health, and it starts with that about the buzz. What you were saying about as an artist and a performance, you're saying about how you can affect and create this chemistry. It's two ways. I always think, and you'll know, sometimes you feed off the audience with that, and that's what this, it's government commissioned research that's come out. So this is how beneficial and helpful it is, and it talks about that buzz, about attending a film, a play, a musical concert, any of that. It talks about that, what that does in terms of the significant events about alleviating pain, frailty, depression, dependence on medication. So that's what they found with this research. And one of the examples that it gives, it says that for over 65s who took drawing classes every week for 3 months at their local museum, it actually was a financial dividend, because it actually prevented them it saved £1,300 on average from going to see their GPs less as a result of being involved with drawing classes. That's just one example. I just think it's the whole thing, the power that you've mentioned, I think, with arts and performance, it's that two-way process. It creates something that will inspire and influence people, that gets you through your days and gets you through, the highlights for the years. The three of us have all been in music, certainly Jean, certainly in a higher level in that, but we've all been involved in performance in some way, so we understand that chemistry. I just think it's so important why art, whatever shape or form, whatever it is so powerful for that physical and that mental health, that well-being that we have, and you've just articulated it.
And that's why I think it's important when we look at theatre. I'm growing up in Wirral, I'm always inspiring young people. We need to see more funding invested in the arts in this area. And I think for me, when we look at ticket prices, not mentioning any group, but I do love music. When we look at ticket prices, these ticket prices need to be lowered so that the arts are more accessible for young people, for families. And this applies to the West End and locally. We want to go to the cinema. In my book, I've got a whole page there on the cinema, which I wrote many years ago. And I think when I grew up going to the cinema in the 80s, we had great ground architectural cinemas, which were big screens, and you could go to the front, pay £1.20 it was for me, and you could actually buy at the confectionery desk one item, like a Mars bar or a packet of Polemans. None of this, the £6 popcorn. I know they have to make money, and I know front of house staff and producers and directors, I know they need to be paid. But if we want to fill our theatres, and when we look at Great Britain, when we look at England, culturally, we are steeped historically in the art with Shakespeare and all great, Ireland as well, and Scotland and Wales, all of us. So we need to create more accessibility for families and young people to afford to go to the cinema and also the theatres. I'm sorry, forgive me for saying this. People in this area, Wirral and the Liverpool City, need to listen to people who have been on the journey artistically and come and talk to us. Because if you don't invest, and you're investing in silly things, culturally, we're just going to lose a lot of heritage that we have here. And it breaks my heart when even me, when I've gone to certain people and asked for funding and I've been turned down, when I know I could do something good for the area. The Power Foundation is an example. What we do with that, we haven't done anything this year or last year. I'd love to do Wuthering Heights with the Power Foundation. We did get some funding a few years ago. We take young people. We take young people. We give them opportunities to work for professionals. We pay them a wage. We give them money. We provide costumes, scripts, and food and catering. We look after them. They have a great experience. And then they decide if it is right for them to follow that path. But that will never happen if people don't wake up to giving more funding. How many theatres do we have in Liverpool? We have a few, but in Wirral, we hardly have any.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. I'm sorry for jumping on my, what do you call it, box.
It's so true, and we've mentioned this before. You know, accessibility to the things we know that are good for us is...
I'm desperate to get my word in here. Like, you know, I totally agree with you, because you look at schools, you look at education, you know, they've fallen down the trap of tech boxing. You know, you have to get your maths. Rishi Sunak, you wanted people to do maths until they're 18. You know, all the creativity all goes out the window. I am going to mention a name here, and I know Ian is actually being linked in with this, whatever, but my wife, she used to be a teacher out in Wallasey School, out in the Aliso Estate, and there was one person, Joe Duffield, whenever it came to drama and things like this, whatever, and not just her husband as well, but the whole school, they were so creative. And how many people within that school have actually gone down the route of the arts and theatre, and the whole school just felt like a community. You know, I didn't even teach in that place, and I feel part of it, and the whole area, and they still get thanked to this day. So, yeah, I applaud you for what you said there. Thanks.
Christopher, we can't thank you enough for coming
on.
No,
you're welcome.
Honestly, you know, telling your story, it's so powerful, and hopefully, you know, anyone who's listening, we wanted to capture resilience, and I think we've more than captured resilience today, so we can't thank you enough. And have a lovely Christmas, and we'll look forward to hearing all about you in the new year. So we're going to take a short break, and then us, the hosts, will be having a little chat about resilience.
You're listening to the Men's Mental Health Podcast, The Man Hug.
Okay, so this month's Man Hug is all on the theme of resilience, and we have just heard from our main guest. So what I thought would be quite nice is, between the hosts, is to ask you guys, what is resilience? What does it mean to you? Conleth, let's start with you.
I get the pressure. I have written down a couple of things about this, because...
but what does it mean to you?
What does it mean to me? Okay, I'll give you an example of resilience, and it's a very, very good coping mechanism. It's sticking your head in the sand. It's a really good one, like, you know, fantastic, but it only lasts for a bit. You know, we've all done it where we go, okay, we'll just blank it off and things like this, whatever. So yeah, you actually have that. There's one. So, but obviously, as we know, I am being flippant there, but how many of us do this? Everything will be fine, like, you know, just keep going on. So to me, it's also the case of, you know, now it's, you know, what I've just done recently is that, you know, us being nurses, is that we all have to, we do a revalidation every 3 years, so we have to write reflections, what they mean to us and things like this. So there's been instances which happened to me years ago, and I've been reflecting on those, and it has made me more resilient. How you actually go, okay, well, I won't put myself in that situation anymore. I'll stay out of those things. So it is being reflective, but it's also maybe being careful as well, so you don't get into these way of things. But I know there are, I'm sorry, I got me Stato head back on again. I know there's been studies done around this, where I've got one down here from the BMJ, actually finds the link between higher mental resilience and lower risk of actual deaths as well. So there is this connection, so we just need to take into account how much mental health does actually affect our living or dying, you know, doing
Interesting.
that. So.
Ian, on to you. What is resilience to you, would you say?
I would say, it's funny, I never actually prepared much for this. I just went to see one of my colleagues, and on her wall, she's actually got a quote by Rosa Parks: "We will fail when we fail to try." And Rosa Parks was the activist, black activist over the national advancement for coloured people in terms of the bus boycott, wasn't it, in the 50s, I think it was in Alabama in America, and she was told by the bus driver to clear the space. She refused to do that, and again, that whole thing in terms of I'm a black person and stuff, and I'm not comparing myself in terms of that as an activist, but I think that point is absolutely right. I think it's pushing yourself, I guess, out of your comfort zone for me. That, you know, have a little adventure, have something that just to keep trying, I think, and having that, I think, is that important. So for me, it's been and everyone here has been involved with the Love Music, Hate Racism. Dean in particular has been really kick-started that, and I think it's dead important because of everything that's happened, certainly after Southport, a little bit of complacency and the rise of the right, which has been really frightening. So I guess for me, it's about being active and doing something in terms of, even just saying no or just being something positive and trying, and that's been really important. As part of that, and being part of the Man Hug and part of this Love Music, Hate Racism, I actually met Dunstan Bruce, who's 1997 classic was Tub Thumping, and he's had a heck of a journey. He was telling us that he had, he made that. They were part of this anarchist collective as a band. They had this #1 hit in 1997, which just hit everywhere, didn't it? It was on they were on all sorts of shows. It was a #1 hit. So then they was accused of actually selling out by the record label. First said, what, we've got anarchists on the label? I didn't know they were anarchists. So they got rid of him. Then all their friends said, I thought you were anarchists. And so he's made a documentary which echoes the lyrics of the actual song, but all of a sudden having this #1 hit, he was seen as a sellout somehow for having this #1 hit. And I think it's that I get knocked down, I get up again, but you're never going to keep me down. And I think for me, that's what it's about. It's about trying, however that is, and sometimes it may not work, but hopefully having the resilience to keep trying. So for me, that's...
And you've given us a national anthem for it as well. Fantastic. Yeah. Dan, what's resilience mean to you then?
Yeah. Well, I suppose what Ian was just saying is that bounce back ability, isn't it? This might be a bit controversial. I find the word resilience, quite a dangerous word, because it's become a buzzword, and people say, oh, we need to show more resilience. I think you need to be more resilient there, without any explanation of how that's achieved. Mm-hmm. I thought I was resilient. I went through my whole 20s, early 30s, thinking I must be like I'm bulletproof. Mm-hmm. I must be one of the most resilient people I know. I went through the multiple separations of my parents. And then the final demise and divorce. I went through massive career changes, lots of life-changing things, and nothing ever seemed to faze me. I thought, God, I must be one of the most resilient people I know. That's not resilience, though, is it, Dan? That was just bottling everything up and putting everything to the back of your mind. And that's the danger of resilience, because, you misconstrue resilience for ignoring your problems and ignoring your troubles, and it will come back and it will bite you on the arse very badly. So resilience is a word that I don't tend to get on too well with, although I do accept that if we talk about resilience in a clinical way and offer guidance, support, and the words that the lads were using, such as reflection and understanding ourselves and how we can cope with distressful or difficult circumstances, then it does have a purpose. But what worries me in society is that resilience has become a word, much the same as well-being. These words are just batted around, and do people really fully understand the meaning of those words to themselves? I, for one, I don't think I did. I still think I'm working that out to a certain degree, of what resilience means to me. And yet, we can look in a dictionary and see that, the ability to recover from a difficult situation, and like Ian was just saying, I get knocked down, I get back up again by Chumbawamba. And, I asked my kids this morning, if I said the word resilience, what does it mean to you? And straight away, my daughter said, Brazilians? What's that, Dad? Which made us chuckle. And my son said, resilience, that means to be strong. But again, I don't disagree with him. It can mean that, but I think we also need to kind of understand that it's not always possible just to be strong, and that resilience has a much deeper meaning, and we need to understand within ourselves what that means to us and how we build our own resilience that works for our values, our beliefs in life. So yeah, bit of around the house way of saying it.
No, it's brilliant, Dan, and I'm so glad, because it was one of those podcasts where we were looking for a theme, and obviously we always base it on our guest story, and we could have had this theme as a million different things, and you're exactly right. I was like quite reluctant to use the word resilience, but that's why I thought this would be a really interesting time to talk about it, because in child and adolescent mental health across the UK now, we have a crisis, and there's no getting away from that. Every paper, every statistic, every report you read, we have a child and adolescent mental health crisis. We spend more money on potholes than we do children's mental health. And the word that is always used within schools and other provisions, I won't name people, is this word of resilience. We need to make resilient children. We need to make resilient young people. That's easy enough to say, and it's a tick box exercise, and you can say you're making these people by doing X, Y, and Z, but the reality of it is far from that, and resilience isn't an outcome for producing poor mental health. It's not an outcome for producing poorly educated young people, all of these other factors that are there, so I'm so glad you've touched on that, because it's such an important word, isn't it? You're right in terms of when you look for a definition for resilience. Don't do this, by the way. It's a very boring activity. There is literally millions and millions of definitions, but the one I kind of like, because I'm talking about crisis again, is the British Red Cross. I think they've kind of nailed it in terms of what it means to them. But they rightly said as well, it means different things to different people, and that's what we need to really sort of take a grasp of. Is at the end of the day, we're all individual, we're all different, everything we do is different, our personalities are different, how we see the world is different, everything else. And I think that the British Red Cross, they've said things like, we think of resilience as your ability to cope with challenge and crisis and keep going. People sometimes call it the ability to bounce back, like you said there, Dan, but latest research shows resilience is more than just a personal skill. It's an interaction between you and your environment. And when you look at that aspect in terms of children and young people again, and mental health, you have to look at those two factors there, don't you? The interaction between you and your environment. That says everything at the moment in terms of what is your environment that you have or don't have at the moment in the UK to make you
It's such a
resilient.
fast-changing environment. So, again, we've been to the schools recently and done the workshops, but seeing two young people grow up in front of my eyes. I've got a 12-year-old and a 15-year-old now, and the way society is changing, and the amount of confusion in society, kids just don't know which way to go, and I think parenting is very different to it was 20-30 years ago, and it's very integral to a child's development, I think, more so than ever.
And one of the big things that to hit on that is when you look at what can we do to make people resilient, and you see this in workplaces, don't you? And there's always training on making staff resilient and things like that. Pay us more money, that would help, or look at other things which are actually going to help our life, not just these tokenistic tick boxes. But with children and young people in particular, the resources that they claim make resilient children, teamwork, team building, social interaction, well, that's all, nice and dandy, but when we're closing youth centres and youth clubs at a faster rate than anything, to have access to sports, you've got to have a fair amount of money in terms of your parents to access these. But there's a million barriers to these things, and these are the things that are, more important in terms of producing outcomes. Why are we not targeting and looking at these things that we know are having a huge impact on people's lives?
I was going to say, it's easy to build resilience if you've been handed opportunity and you've been handed, you're on a reasonable level of social economic status. But what if you're right at the bottom and you've got addiction issues and you've, been exposed to horrible, horrendous acts such as sexual abuse as a child, and you've never been loved by a parent who has nurtured you and brought you up into adulthood? How are you expected to have resilience? And being back in practice, I've seen I've spoken to people, and you don't know where to start, because it's had such a horrendous childhood. How can you expect that person to have resilience, or understand where to start, and these are the challenges. So we're kind of four guys that have had difficulties perhaps in our lives, but we've managed to get through those difficulties, and we've had a lot of opportunity as well. But some people, they have nothing. So how can you expect those people to have resilience?
That's it. I was talking to a colleague last week, and we were talking about a little bit about my sort of childhood in relation to the things that he wanted answers for, and it was funny because at the time of my childhood, where you're looking at all of these key milestones to build resilience, we didn't have any money at all. We were on an estate which had high rates of crime and the highest rate of drug use in Europe and all of the rest of things. But I'll tell you what we did have. We had 2 youth clubs on that estate where, I'd learned things like it helped my confidence through sport and a lot of the courses that I was able to access there. And it gave me sort of competence in certain skills from doing things, and all of these things that, we talk on here all the time about community. Community is priceless. It's absolutely priceless, and every person that we've had on here, from the Florrie to the football therapy to walking groups to men's groups, they say that community word all of the time. And for children and young people now, my worry when I'm looking at young people I know within families and other people's families is, are they losing that sense of community because of maybe they live in a virtual world and their community is online? Is it because, again, postcode lotteries, is there not a youth centre in their area, or did they not have access to sport and other sort of community things? And it's sort of a big worry, isn't it, really?
Yeah, it's, I know it's maybe taken it to an extreme, but you look at the likes of Scandinavian countries where they've actually gone, right, okay, maybe a Friday, you finish half day on a Friday, but what they stress is go home and spend time with your family, spend time with your kids, and they have done that. I know Iceland in particular, they used to have a real problems regarding alcohol with kids and things like this, like, violence, aggression, things like that, and they completely turned it around. Typical Scandinavian, they always seem to be able to flip things around. And they set up youth centres, sports clubs. They did all these things. They invested. The government invested in their population. That's what they did. And what came out of it? Did Iceland ever beat England in the soccer? Yeah. Annihilate them. And really, if you look at it, that's where it came from. They all did these things, and it's a completely different society now. But that's because there was investment in it from the powers that be.
Yeah, really interesting. Just to ask you all like another sort of question, just to get you kind of reflecting. Is there an obstacle when you look back and you think, God, I overcame that? And if so, what did you learn? Is there a certain thing that you're most proud of, and what was your sort of like your learning from that? Anyone want to start us off with that one? Reflect back. Yeah. The biggest obstacle, biggest challenge you had, you overcame it. What did you learn from that?
I guess for me, when I was 15, I went for an interview. I've had lots of failures in my life. And one of them, I always wanted to join the Royal Navy. I'd look back and think, God, why did you want to join the Royal Navy? But I did. I wanted to join the Royal Navy. And I had an interview in St Helens at the age, I think it was 14 or 15. I was still at school. My dad took me in the car. And I can remember this interview. And I hadn't prepared, and I guess I didn't. It's that learning, isn't it? I didn't realise you had to be prepared. I was going for a chat, and I can just remember this bloke, and I really wanted to cry in this interview. And I remember thinking, don't cry, Ian, don't cry, don't let him make you cry. But I remember from that, so age 14, 15, I thought, I'll never let anyone do that again to me, an interview. So subsequently, I never got into the Royal Navy. I never got into lots of other things as well. But I always did better at interviews. So I was always about preparing and about making sure I knew about why I was there, what they were expecting, all those sorts of things. So I guess that was one of those things, to be prepared. Although I did have an interview recently that I hadn't prepared, and I did again the same thing. Guess what happened? I didn't get
so
the.
You've
get
learned
the
that
post.
Preparation is key, then. Ian?
Yes,
yeah, fantastic.
And nothing wrong with the Navy. All right, So
yeah, Dan.
I don't know. Perhaps doing my masters. Never consider myself to be academically gifted. Always struggled from being a kid up to getting the masters. So I knew it was going to be hard. During my masters, it's probably when I realised to myself I wasn't indestructible and that I needed support. It was probably my first major wobble. But I did get to the end of it, and I did get my masters, despite a GP saying to me after 6 months, "Are you sure this job's for you? Are you sure you should be doing this master's degree?" So luckily I ignored that advice and carried on, and now I should perhaps followed it. But no, I think getting my masters made me realise that I could do it, and I can bounce back from
determination. There's the learning there, Dan.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah, Colin.
I suppose so many failures and things in the Bible. Not failures, but I didn't make life easy for myself. It was a case of my wife-to-be and we were 19 and we had a baby on the way, so I was still at university, things like that. And we lived over, we always say this, we lived over here in Liverpool, no family around us at all. And we did it, got through it. She got her degree. Now, teaching, whenever I got mine, then moved on, things like that. So, and I keep saying the thing that got me through that, or made me actually focus, was my eldest daughter. I've said this many times to her, and so I think it was that thing, and it was just like, right, okay, is that answered?
Yeah, it does. Brilliant. Colin, if you had something you wanted to say before we finish?
Just not to say, I wanted to give very quickly, is this the Christmas episode we've actually got? So like last year, pass that down to Dan.
Oh wow! Well, for those that can't see this, Connor's handing out gifts here, and
okay,
I think he's trying
gifts.
to.
No. That's Dean's.
Oh,
there you go, Ian.
It's not follow-up aubergine, is it?
There you go. Follow-up aubergine.
Oh wow! So Connor's just handed out some beautiful ornaments for Christmas.
What
I love that.
have you got me?
So what's that? Oh yeah, little bunny slippers for my honey bun.
A moustache.
Ian's got his little pride moustache,
Rainbow
and Dean's got his. I saw this decoration remind me of his Mr. Bean car.
It is. That is literally my car. Oh, wow.
And again, viewers won't be able to
What?
to see that. There's a little tear in Dean's eye.
It is. What a beautiful way to end this segment. So anyway, we're off now to the old Man Hug Secret Santa and have a quick few mince pies. But next up, we're going to be joined by Helen Gilbert from the Samaritans.
You're listening to the Men's Mental Health Podcast, The Man Hug.
Okay, it's this part of the Man Hug now where we shine a light on a service, and they don't come much bigger. We're actually joined by Helen Gilbert, who is the branch director of Liverpool and Merseyside Samaritans branch. So thank you so much for joining us, Helen.
Thank you for having me here.
So the Samaritans, many people won't know about its history, but it is fascinating. So can you tell us a little bit about how it started and the reasons behind it?
Yeah, so the Samaritans as a charity is over 70 years old now, and it was originally started by a man called Chad Ferrara. He was a vicar, and obviously the name the Samaritans does come from the Bible story of the Good Samaritan. Although we are non-religious, anyone can contact us. It was just that's the way it started. And it started because he'd done the funeral of a 12-year-old girl who'd very sadly ended her own life. And he thought it was just absolutely shocking that had happened and that this young girl had ended her own life. I believe it was because she'd started her periods and didn't know what that meant and had no one to talk to about it, because obviously this is back in the early 1950s, and so thought there was something terribly wrong with her, and rather than talking to anyone, ended her own life. And he thought something needed to be done, that someone needed to open up a place where people could talk to people. So he started it in his local church basement, and it expanded from there. And Liverpool branch is actually the second oldest branch in the whole of England. So we're just going into our 65th year. We'll be 65 on the 1st of March, so we've been around quite a long time as well.
Amazing. So we'll have to get some birthday cake ready for that one, I think. So 70 years of people listening, you know, it's an incredible achievement, isn't it? What are some of the key stories from over those decades? You know, is the stories that you know throughout the Samaritans, where they're sort of like key stories of how it's helped people?
There has, yeah. And if anyone is ever interested, on the Samaritans websites, there are kind of people who've put comments on there about how Samaritans have saved their life, how Samaritans have made a difference. It doesn't always happen that way because Samaritans is a completely confidential service. So it's not like we can go out to our kind of callers and do a bit of a post-call survey, but some people do feel the need to reach out and let us know the amazing work that we've done. And it's also, you'll find a lot of volunteers may have had experience themselves in the past of either using Samaritans or suffering with their own mental health. So it makes a massive difference in people's lives.
Wow, it's incredible, isn't it? One thing that we thought would be really useful for people who are listening is what does a call look like to someone, for, you know, if they are thinking, oh, I'm going to ring the Samaritans, but I just don't know what to expect. What would that be like? Yeah,
so anyone can call the Samaritans at any time. And I'll say the number a couple of times when we're talking, but the number is 116123. And it's a free phone number, so you don't need to worry about credit on your mobile or anything like that. We are open 24 hours a day. We never close. There are certain times, unfortunately, where we will be a little bit busier than other times. So I would say to people, try and hang on. If you are in a queue, I know it can be off-putting, but we will always try and answer the calls. You'll get through to someone, and all the calls are answered the same way, which is, hello, Samaritans, can help you. Other than that, it's not scripted. All the volunteers are trained the same, but it's just a conversation between two people around whatever you want to talk about, whatever you're going through, and as the caller you can lead that call. You can tell us about, you know, if you're having a tough time at work or at family, or you're just not feeling very good. It's whatever you want to talk about. A lot of people do still see us as a bit of a suicide hotline, and that is not the case. By all means, obviously, if people do have thoughts of suicide or are planning on ending their own lives, we encourage them to call us. It's a completely safe and non-judgmental place for them to talk about those feelings. But what we hope is people won't get there. People will use our service when they do start to feel a bit down and having a tough time. So, you know, whenever you need to call, just call us on that number. And, you know, the call can last as long as you want it to. And you can talk about whatever you feel is going to help you. You may be asked a couple of questions from the volunteer just to kind of open the call up. They might try and explore some options with you, but it is your call and whatever you want to talk about.
Yeah, amazing. Do you link in with like other services to signpost people or direct them? Or?
We do, yes. So as the Samaritans, we're trained listeners, so we're not there to give advice. We're not experts in kind of any fields. What we always say is, even if you are an expert, say in your day life, in your day job, once you put your Samaritans hat on, that doesn't matter. You're there to be a listener. So we do signpost people if they do need that practical help or support, or they need kind of mental health support from kind of an NHS point of view. We do kind of signpost people to appropriate services.
Oh, it's brilliant, isn't it? You just, you know, made the really important point there, just listening. It's just, for some people, they just don't get that experience in their day-to-day, do they, in their life, the power of listening, you know.
It is.
As a mental health academic, I teach my mental health students all of the time that the most important thing that we can do is listen, isn't it, you know?
It is, and it's about actively listening, because a lot of people say, oh, I'm a good listener, but people tend to talk more than they listen, or they'll jump in to give advice, or, say I started talking about, I'm really sad because, my nan died. Oh, well, I remember when my nan died, and this is what I did, and this is what I went through. And you think you're doing that to be helpful, but it's really turning it around and making it about you. So just kind of being there in kind of silence almost sometimes, and letting someone decompress, because a lot of the times when we're going through things, we don't even know how we're feeling. It's all that jumbled up that we need to kind of get it out so we can start to kind of explore how we're actually feeling and then what our options can be. And the only way to do that is to talk.
Yeah, it's amazing advice. Why is it that you think the Samaritans works? What is it that sort of like, is the most powerful thing about it? For running for 70 years, you're clearly doing something, something very well.
Something right. I think because we do just listen, because it helps that obviously we're free. It helps that we're there all the time. So there are a lot of fantastic services out there, but a lot of them are, because a resource is only available kind of Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. We're there no matter what kind of day. We'll have volunteers kind of there 3 o'clock in the morning on Christmas night, still answering the phone. And the fact that we're non-judgmental. So you can call us up, you can tell us whatever's going on, kind of your deepest, darkest secrets, what you're scared of telling, your friends or your family about. We're not there to judge you, we're not there to make fun out of you. And it's a weird thing, but sometimes having that conversation with a stranger is so much easier than having a conversation with someone that you know.
Definitely, yeah, it's so important, isn't it? Now, obviously, you guys rely very heavily on two major things, volunteers and fundraising. So we have a lot of listeners who often want to get involved and help out with themselves as well, whether that is for volunteering or fundraising. So how can people get involved with the Samaritans?
So in general, Samaritans is always looking for volunteers and fundraising, and if you go on the Samaritans website, that will give you directions on how to do that. If anyone is local to the area, I'd suggest you go on the Liverpool and Merseyside Samaritans website. We've got our own website. And you can look at volunteering directly with ourselves, and you can also look at donating directly to ourselves as well, because we are completely self-funded as well. We do have an Infuse page, and people do some wonderful things for us, whether they do kind of activities of, runs, walks, abseiling. It's the birthday, so they ask friends and family to donate rather than giving them presents, and anyone can do that for us on there.
Amazing. I seen last year there was a guy who ran the London Marathon as a telephone for Spartans.
He's been doing that for, I think, over 30 years. He's been doing that for a long time.
Incredible. It's hard enough just doing a marathon, but as a whole telephone, absolutely achievements. So people can literally do anything, can't they, in the sense for fundraising and also just sort of like spreading the message as well, really, as well.
It is, yeah. So one of Samaritan's big campaigns is Small Talk Saves Lives, and that's where we encourage people to just have that little kind of chit-chat with people and ask people if they're okay, but to do it in the sense that you really want an answer, because I think it's quite a British thing, really, where it's a pleasantry. We're not expecting a real answer. You kind of see someone, you walk past them in the corridor and you go, morning, you okay? And you expect that default, I'm fine, thank you, how are you? You're not expecting the real answer. So it's actually, are you okay? You seem a little tired, you seem a little stressed, I haven't spoke to you for a while, do you want to grab a coffee, sit down? It makes a big difference.
It does. I remember the campaign, the Small Talk, where it was on the train station.
Yes.
And someone was asking us about the weather rather than saying, are you
it can
okay,
be about
just to
anything.
start it.
Yeah, where can I buy a coffee? Do you know when this train's due? If someone is struggling, it can kind of snap them out of that thought process and allow them to have that human interaction, which is a massive thing for people. A lot of people struggle with isolation and loneliness, and that's not necessarily about how many people they've got around them in their lives, it's just a feeling that they've got. So having that interaction with someone makes a massive difference.
Yeah, amazing. What do you guys do in terms of staff for your own well-being? Listening to people obviously can be quite traumatic, and there can be a lot to take home with you, can't it, really? So do you just have a process to debrief?
We do, yes. So we go through very extensive training as Samaritans listening, and that's something that carries on throughout the whole of our kind of lives as a volunteer. We do ongoing training, ongoing mentoring to make sure we've got the skills to cope with that. We're never on shift alone. We're always on shift with at least one other person. If we can get it more than that. So in Liverpool, we're quite lucky. We can have 7 volunteers on shift at the same time. Don't always get that, so if anyone does want to volunteer, please feel free. So we can talk to each other. As I said before, what happens in Samaritans is confidential. It stays within Samaritans. So it's very important that we talk to each other in the Samaritans context, because once we leave the building, once we leave the branch, you can't go home and kind of talk to your partner about what's happened if you've had kind of a tough day taking calls. So we need to make sure we've got that level of support in there. Yeah,
that's brilliant. What does the training, what's the process for that for anyone who does want to become a volunteer?
Yeah, so it's absolutely fantastic training. It's certainly some of the best training I've ever been involved with or had. And it's a mixture of online, digital learning and face-to-face learning to try and accommodate different learning styles. And that is over the course of 6 weeks, where they'll be doing some digital topics and then coming into the branch to do 6 physical face-to-face sessions where they cover different topics about listening skills, about dealing with people who might have mental health concerns, about dealing with people who want to talk about suicide, as well as kind of just some of the practical stuff about how to use the technology and, you know, things like that. So the training can be quite intense, but very good.
Amazing. So lastly, I suppose the big thing, what's your advice for anyone contemplating making that call? How do people contact the Samaritans?
Yeah, so for anyone that is struggling, obviously we're coming up to a time of the year where it is a really tough time for people. People always say, oh, Christmas is the most wonderful time of the year. And for a lot of people, it's not. It can be very stressful. So if anyone is thinking of, you know, talking to us, please do call us at any time on 116 123. So bear with us if there is a bit of a queue. There will be a volunteer there ready to take your call, and you can talk about whatever you need to.
Yeah, amazing. I've seen this on the website. It says, whatever you're going through, a Samaritan will face it with you, and I love that. And as you say, we're here 24 hours a day, 365 days a year as well. It's just an incredible. For yourself, how rewarding is it to be part of the Samaritans?
It's very rewarding, absolutely. It's amazing that you can be part of something that is helping people, and it kind of sometimes puts your own things into perspective as well. I can be having a bit of a bad day, I can be really stressed, and you go in there and it changes your mindset and you think, actually I can get through this, or, you know, it's not as bad as I thought it was when I came in here. So it's really helpful. Oh,
amazing. I think just to kind of recap, I think the big thing for me here is that, you know, it's not as scary as what people might make out. It's non-judgmental. It's free. There's someone that's just going to be there to listen as well. It's an amazing thing, isn't it? You know, it's obviously saving lives, and it's also an amazing outlet for people who are struggling with things where they haven't got anyone to talk to at that time. You know.
That's it, and it's not scary. People can ring up, you know, even if you decide it's not for you when you start talking to someone, that's absolutely fine. We're not going to keep you kind of hostage on the phone. You can say, oh, it's not for me, or just end the call. You can try and call back another time. Yeah. So it is just about making that call and talking to someone. Fantastic.
Yeah, just asking, like, you know, because sometimes you see it, not advertised at Christmas, but, you know, you'd be watching, I know, Noel's house party or something like that, and come along the bottom of the line. If you need help, call this number. Things which was absolutely fantastic, and it really, really was. But obviously, that's in television. Do you advertise in any forms, like, you know, social media platforms?
Yes, so like Samaritans have platforms on social media, on Facebook and Insta. You'll see kind of our posters out and around. Some of the main places you'll see our posters are places at train stations, bridges, unfortunately places where people might go to try and end their own lives. If there is anything on the media, whether that's radio or television, that has been to do with mental health, suicide, self-harm, there will normally be a little thing that flashes up, as you say, that says, you know, if anyone's been affected by this, please call Samaritans, and it'll give the details.
Yeah, because you know, I don't know if previous listeners remember, I did that recording, wasn't it, with the dancers whenever they were doing the Samaritans advert. I think it was an online advert you actually were doing. The video, and Ian and I went to the screening of that. Were you there for that?
Yeah, so that was a video that we commissioned for the Prevention of Suicide Day, called Speak Out, and that's on the Samaritans YouTube, so people can search that. It's a very powerful video about the way someone's kind of inner thoughts can overtake them, and about speaking out about it, about giving us a call.
Yeah, I think the campaigns have always been incredible for Samaritans. They're always fantastic, really sort of insightful, aren't they, and thought-provoking.
Yeah, we were just talking earlier before we actually came on, just about the people who partook in it as well, like, you know, because they came to me afterwards and just saying it was just like therapy for them whenever we were talking through, going through it. And it relates to this as well, it goes back to that talking, things like this, you know, the four of us fellas here, like, you know, we've been doing this nearly 2 years, you're saying, Dan, it's just our therapy, you know, it's that open and talking. So
it is, and that's everything the Samaritans is, you know, is based on, isn't it? Is talking and listening, and that's, you know, the basis of this podcast really, is getting men in particular to talk. So thank you so much. I mean, I think for us, we now can see the Samaritans as, you know, an accessible service, 24 hours a day, you know, 365 days a year, and we're hoping our listeners will take that message as well, and if not for themselves, to help and signpost other people who may need the support of Samaritans at any point. So 116 123.
Yes.
And it's free 24/7.
It is,
There
yes.
we go. Fantastic. Helen, you guys, you do an amazing job. We can't thank you enough. It's absolutely amazing what you do. And thanks so much for just coming and letting everyone know all about the Samaritans. Fantastic. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
So follow us on Instagram at the Man Hug Podcast.
If you or anybody else you know is struggling with their mental health, visit hubofhope.co.uk or download the app today and find local and national mental health support.